Good afternoon. I'm Officer Bill Hummel. I'm a spokesperson for the Aurora Police Department. We're here today to brief you on an officer-involved shooting that occurred in the early morning hours of July 30th, 2018. You're going to be hearing from Chief Metz today, also accompanied by the Assistant District Attorney of the 17th Judicial District, Jess Redman, the 18th Judicial District Attorney, George Brauchler, and also present is Sergeant Matt Files with the Aurora Major Crimes Homicide Unit. I want to remind everybody that the information that you're going to hear today is preliminary in nature and is subject to change due to the ongoing investigation. Chief Metz.
Thank you. This morning I had the honor and privilege to meet with about 10 plus family members of Mr. Richard Gary Black. It was a meeting that I think was incredibly helpful and healing, not only for their family but also for the Aurora Police Department, who continues to remain heartbroken over this incident. During that meeting, I learned a lot about Mr. Black. I learned obviously that he was a family man. His wife talked about how she had first met him, how long they had been together, few funny stories along the way. And so there were actually some times during that meeting where there was a little bit of levity during a very serious discussion. Mr. Black, as most of you know, is a Vietnam veteran. He served this country honorably. He was a Purple Heart recipient, and he was awarded the Bronze Star after his service in Vietnam. Even after Vietnam, he continued to serve his country as a federal employee and retired from that position in 2015. He loved his family. He loved the time that he spent with his wife. His wife, in fact, was someone who actually assisted in a program that many of you know that we have called Cops Fighting Cancer, in which she actually had made quilts for children at Children's Hospital who were going through serious illnesses. There's no doubt in our mind, and there's certainly no dispute in any way, shape, or form, that Mr. Black saved his family's life that night, in particular his young grandson. There's no doubt that Mr. Black put himself before his family, that he did everything he could to protect what was most important to him, and that was his family. And so, as I said earlier, we remain heartbroken over this situation. We have assured the family that we are there for them in any way, shape, or form that we can be. And we've continued over these last few days to have regular communication with them and have provided different types of assistance over these last few difficult days. We know and we understand that, as we've said several times, that there's been a great deal of frustration in the community for the lack of information that has come out. This case, about 80 hours old at this time, has been painfully investigated. Has lots of people, lots of folks who have been part of the investigation, part of making sure that the family is getting what they need. So I know that there's been a great deal of frustration in the community. And as I've stated several times already, there was a great deal of frustration on our part as a police department, because we do pride ourselves in getting out in front on as many things as we can. And part of that was due to the fact that because of the complexities of this investigation, in our partnership with the 17th Judicial District Attorney's Office, otherwise known as the Adams County District Attorney's Office, they asked that we not release information until certain aspects of the investigation were complete. And we felt to maintain that integrity that we would honor that request, as painful as it was for many, including ourselves. I know right from the beginning that there's going to be questions about, are we going to show the body-worn camera video? And I will read a letter to you that we received from the family just a few minutes ago But at this time, and that will be explained a little bit further a little later, but at this time, we will not be sharing that body-worn camera. Also, part of that is at the request of the Adams County DA because of the fact that the investigation continues and so forth. We are supportive of releasing it. I want to make that very clear. But as I read the letter to you later, you'll see why, combined with the Adams County request, that we're not. We had planned to also play for you the 911 call from one of the residents from the home where Mr. Black lived. It has been decided that we will not share that right now. Again, I will share with you a letter about that. But part of the issue with both the 911 tape and the body-worn camera tape, just as with any type of technology, is that there are parts that aren't as clear as far as the clarity is concerned, that there are parts of the tapes that are inaudible because of a lot of background noise. So one of the things that I am going to do is order that we conduct an independent forensic review of both the 911 tape and the body-worn camera so that we can make sure that we have all the accurate information that is presented in both those mediums. And again, I will read you a statement from the family in just a few minutes. It's no surprise that the family is incredibly traumatized. They are grieving. As you know, there was a young child in the home that was violently and seriously assaulted, and there is a great deal of concern on their part for the health and well-being of that child. And as you'll hear in the letter, some of the decisions that we are making today about some of the release of material greatly has to do with that child's ability to heal, and that is incredibly important. Obviously, when we are talking about different types of incidents within a police department, an officer-involved shooting ranks right up there about as far as being one of the most serious situations that can occur. That we take these very serious. That there's obviously a great deal of community interest, a great deal of obviously interest from the family in wanting to know the facts. So we are here today, obviously, to now be able to share with you some of those things. Because we are at the disadvantage of not being able to show the body-worn camera and play that 911 tape for you right now, I'm going to relay to you what I have personally heard. I have probably listened to the 911 tape, I've forgotten how many times, many, many times. And I've watched the body-worn camera footage along with numerous folks in my agency, as well as members from the Adams County District Attorney's Office. I should mention that when we did meet with the family this morning, and I apologize I didn't mention this, when we did meet with the family this morning, we did allow them to listen to the 911 tape, and we did allow them to view the body-worn camera footage, as disturbing as both were. So I'm going to start at the beginning here as to what happened. As we are able to piece together right now, across the street from the Black family's home, there is a house there where they were having some kind of a party or gathering. One of the individuals there, named Deshaun Harper, for whatever reason, was out of control. He began damaging cars right near that house, was acting irrationally, and at one point, while damaging a car, he injured himself. We started to receive a number of 911 calls from that location, and we are actually going to play for you those calls as well as the dispatch call from dispatch to our patrol units. We will play those for you here a little later. He injured himself, and then again we began getting calls from 911 from the home on Iola Street. Those 911 calls, as you will see, were very difficult to get information. A number of calls, people hung up on the dispatcher before providing necessary information. And in fact, in one, I think you'll hear one caller says, the dispatch actually calls that person back, and the person says, "I don't know where I am, just get here." Not a lot of information to go on at that point. And we still really don't know what's going on. And there's still no description provided to our dispatch as to what this person looked like who was out of control. At one point, this individual decided to run to the house across the street, that being the house of the Black family, and began pounding on the door. And at one point, knocked the door completely off its hinges. I don't know, I know some of you have been up to that location or have seen pictures. It is a very big door, a very solid door, and somehow was able to knock that door right off the hinges. And he went inside, and when he went inside, at one point he grabbed the 11-year-old child and dragged the child into the bathroom. I'm not going to go into the graphic details of what happened in the bathroom, other than to say that that child was violently assaulted. He locked the door, and at one point during these 911 calls, someone made a comment that the man who had entered was trying to drown him. We did receive the call from one of the residents, in this case this was Mr. Black's wife, about what was going on. It was an incredibly difficult tape to listen to emotionally, but also a very difficult tape to listen to because of all the screaming that was going on. A lot of screaming going on, a very, very chaotic situation. The dispatcher had a very difficult time hearing what was being said, had to repeat questions several times. At one point, the dispatcher did ask the caller, "Are there weapons?" The caller asked somebody else, "Are there weapons?" And their answer came back as no. There was no physical description given, even during that phone call, as to what that suspect looked like. What was told to us during that phone call that she was able to get out was that the person was in the bathroom, was hurting the child, that there was lots of blood everywhere, and that, rescue was needing to be called. When the suspect got into the residence, a number of folks from across the street where he had started departing ran in after him. So imagine yourself in your own home. It's 1:30 in the morning, and not only do you have one person breaking your door down, now you have multiple people coming in after him, and you don't know what's going on. These folks ran in for the purpose of trying to get the suspect out of the house. Unfortunately, it sounds like he may have locked the door, but for whatever reason, they were not able to get to him. At one point, and I apologize, I'm rambling a little bit here. When we were on the phone with one of the other callers from the residents across the street, they had mentioned on the call, as I'm sure you'll hear here, that family member was on drugs. And what kind of drugs, I don't know. So I initially just wanted to kind of paint that picture for you of what was going on at the house. Again, an incredibly chaotic situation, a very violent situation, lots and lots of folks involved, probably upwards of 10 people in that house at one time before police got there. And I think this may be a good time for us to key up the dispatch tape and the other 911 tapes that came in. So I'm going to turn that over.
Yeah, I'll have services there. Here at 4 Tech.
Which one are we showing?
301. 301 on the unknown problem. It's going to be at 10609 East Montview Boulevard. 10609 East Montview Boulevard. RP who's stating that there was somebody trying to break into their house. Lots of people crying, and there's somebody that's bleeding there. It is going to be across the street from the 1995 Iola Street call with a party that's saying that there was something going, an altercation there. 301 South Florida. In a car at 301. Cruiser 13, I mean. Cruiser 13, thank you. 301, Cruiser 13, we're starting to rescue since they're saying there's a known male bleeding in the house. Cruiser 13, sir. 301, Cruiser 13, I know you're on scene. They're saying a male was possibly trying to drown a 11-year-old. Cruiser 13, we got shots fired. You didn't say by for tones?
Yeah, man, 317.
Dispatch, Cruiser 13 calling shots fired at 10609 East Montview Blvd. Need to start. You have to start that way.
Cruiser
Cruiser 7, we rescue here. Shots fired, officer. Copy, rescue's already en route. Channel. So what happened? And channels are patched at this time.
Where are you guys at?
It should be at 10609 East Montview Blvd, unless they switch somewhere. Cruiser 32, add me to District 1.
1824 as well.
301.
301.
301 going. 301 going.
If you could start the next unit in just to secure the people out in the front yard.
I got units walking outside of each other. 301 going over there, Trevor.
As the next units come in, secure the people in the front yard. There's like 4 or 5 witnesses in the front yard.
All right, copy. In 318, what's your traffic?
I'll actually be added to the D1 call. We were just added, thanks.
Cruiser 13, do you have medical coming? Cruiser 13, that's affirmed. Rescue's in a row.
Okay, just have them stage and we'll clear in just a second. We're clearing the house. We got 2 male parties.
Copy, staging rescue, 2 male parties, and we're clearing the house.
Hey, boy, could you come up here and get the child? Male child. Okay.
321, East Montview, call please.
Everyone, Cruiser 13, we're clear back here. Cruiser 13, we're going forward here. Say a rescue hot, please.
Cruiser 13, copy, rescue coming in hot.
Hey, Regina, when you get there, work on shutting down the roads for everybody. Hey, firm. 13 I'm out.
309, do we have any parties outstanding? Cruiser 13, we can out.
Chris,
In Cruiser 13, we still have the channels patched. Can we
we can cut.
send everybody over to channel 1? Yeah, I'll have services there. Here at 4-month tech. 301.
Go ahead.
301 on the unknown problem. It's going to be at 10609 East Montview Blvd.
Okay. All right. My apologies. I was just told that we don't have those other 911 tapes. We are going to make sure we get those to you as quickly as possible, so I apologize for that. But in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and move forward on this. As I stated before, because we can't show the body-worn camera at this time, I'm going to describe for you what I've personally viewed, and then just kind of go from there. So on the 911 tape, or excuse me, on the body-worn camera, the first 30 seconds of that body-worn camera are the officers inside their patrol car responding to the incident. You don't hear audio during that first 30 seconds because there is a buffer that is in place that the audio doesn't start until they actually turn on the cameras. But it will always record the last, or maintain the last 30 seconds, but prior to turning on the camera. So you see them responding. When they arrive at the scene, they get out of their car, they begin walking towards the car. There are numerous people out front of the house. They are very agitated, they're very emotional, there's a lot of yelling. You hear people saying something to the comment of, you know, we try to get in there, he's hurting the child. Keeping in mind, at one point you hear, as I think you heard here, there was a dispatch to officers that says that the child was being drowned. They're walking up to the home. As they walk up to the home, you can see on the camera that the officer passes the wife of Mr. Black. And as she passes, she says, and I quote, "He has a gun," unquote. Again, that quote was, "He has a gun." Again, the officers, not knowing what's going on inside, continue to move forward. As they're moving forward, they hear shots fired. So within 33 seconds of their arrival on scene, 33 seconds within their arrival on scene, they hear shots fired from inside the home. Again, the officers could hear a lot of screaming inside the home. And again, they're advancing towards the house when the shots are fired. When the shots are fired, the officers step back a bit from the front door. And a little bit, just a few seconds later, they see Mr. Black emerge into the officer's view. So the officer is just outside the front door. He is looking inside, and he about what we're estimating 15 to 20 feet from where they were. They see this man emerge from behind a wall. He walks out of what appears to be a room. He walks back to the room, and they can see when he comes in and out, they see that he is holding a gun. They also see that in one hand, and he's holding a flashlight in the other hand. He's walking back and forth. At about 1 second later, the officer said, yet one of the officers yells, "Gun, gun." For the next 13 seconds, officers continue to give at least 5 commands to Mr. Black to drop the gun and to show his hands. We don't know why, but for whatever reason, Mr. Black did not drop the gun. About 10 seconds later, during all these commands, Mr. Black walks around into the main room, walking towards the officers, again with the gun in one hand and the flashlight in the other. He begins to raise the flashlight towards the officer. He still has the gun in the other hand, and it was at that time that my officer fired 4 rounds, causing Mr. Black to fall to the ground. They continued to give Mr. Black orders to show his hands. They asked for rescue. They put out over the air that shots had been fired inside. For the next 42 seconds, as the officers were trying to establish, the safety of themselves and others, they had a conversation that, look, we still have a baby inside or a child inside that is potentially being drowned. Officers were able to hear the screams coming from inside. That officer who actually fired the first fired those rounds directed the officers behind him to glove up and to begin to provide aid to Mr. Black. That officer and probably 1 or 2 other officers immediately then converged forward and went towards where the screaming was coming from. When they went in, they found the bedroom or the bathroom where the screaming was coming from, and it was there that the officers found a deceased nude man on the floor of the bathroom, which turns out to be Mr. Harper. Inside the bathtub was the juvenile, the young man, and his father. His father was in there, and again, they were in the bathroom communicating with the officers. The child was screaming that the suspect, Mr. Harper, was the one that assaulted him, and gave pretty graphic details at that immediate time of what had just happened to him. That same officer then pied away, went to another room to check because they don't know how many suspects are in the room. They don't know, we knew there were multiple people in there. They need to establish that scene safe. Other officers behind him actually went to the bathroom to care for the child and the dad. That officer and another officer continued to search the house for additional injured and/or additional suspects. So from that time until they found the young child in the bathroom, it was 2 minutes and 27 seconds. From the time they arrived to the time they went into that bathroom, it was 2 minutes and 27 seconds. So this was a very fast-paced response. Once the scene had been secured, Mr. Black was immediately transported to the hospital, where he unfortunately succumbed to his injuries. I personally was notified not long after the shooting, and myself, along with other members of our command staff, members of our Aurora Police Department's Major Crimes Unit, the Denver Police Department, and the 17th Judicial District Attorney's Office responded. And I actually personally responded to the scene and was briefed a little bit of what happened there. I've mentioned the suspect's name a couple times already, but just for the record, his name is Dejan Quinzel Harper, date of birth April 17th, 1992. He has an extensive and violent background. It is obvious to us that Mr. Harper was killed by Mr. Black. Was killed by Mr. Black as Mr. Black was attempting to save the lives of his family. So we have provided you in your media packet some information about Mr. Harper, courtesy of the Denver Police Department. Let me take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about the officer. As I said before, this officer ran into an incredibly dangerous situation. He put himself in harm's way. He ran in as others were running out, even after shots were fired, knowing that he could potentially be shot himself. Even after the shooting, as I said before, he directed officers to not only give aid to Mr. Black, but also to provide aid to the child and the father that were in the bathroom. This officer has been with the APD for 3 years. He works in District 1, which is Northeast Aurora, works the graveyard shift. He's been involved in a number of community events, and in fact, that Saturday morning prior to the shooting was at our Shop with a Cop event at Walmart. He has no prior internal affairs complaints. This officer is a military veteran who served his country on one or two deployments. What I can tell you about this officer is that in conversations that our folks have had with him, is that he is incredibly heartbroken over this situation. He, being a veteran himself, and then finding out as well that not only Mr. Black what Mr. Black had done to save his family, but also being a veteran, has been devastating to him. And he and his family wanted me to make sure that I relayed to the community and to Mr. Black's family that they are praying for them. I know that many of you are aware, since it's been in the media, that this same officer was involved in an officer-involved shooting about 30 days before this one. And I want to talk just real briefly about that. That shooting occurred on June 27th, 2018 in the 8900 block of East Colfax. That was on the Arapahoe County side. That explains a little bit by why Mr. Brauchler is here. In that situation, as much like this one, we responded. We investigated that situation in partnership with Denver PD, and in this case, 18th Judicial District Attorney's Office. He returned to duty 18 days, or basically 2.5 weeks after his shooting. Prior to him coming back, number one, he went through all the requirements that are part of our policy for officers to adhere to prior to coming back after an officer-involved shooting. He received peer support through our Employee Support and Wellness Unit by experienced officers who have been involved in officer-involved shootings. He actually had spent time with our department's psych services. He also spent time down at the police range with our trainers to make sure that they could tell that he was ready to come back to work. And then in consultation with the Arapahoe County DA, we believed that, and in consultation with our psych services, we believed that this officer was ready to come back to work. I know that sometimes questions come up, is that too soon? I can tell you that when you look at, and I know many of you have been provided this packet, but when you look at the International Association Chiefs of Police standards when it comes to officers returning to work after an officer-involved shooting, that the typical range is 3 days. And in this case, we far extended that, and that's common. We review each of these situations on how officers are involved in a shooting and when they come back on a case-by-case basis. The reality is our officers, we can't control what our officers are going to run into, whether it's 10 days after a shooting or 2 years after a shooting. The situation dictates their response, and I believe this officer was ready to go back. One of the things I have asked, because of the uniqueness of this case, I've asked both the 18th District and the 17th District Attorney's offices to conduct a expedited investigation and review once we turn it over to them. They have both asked, at least at this time, that the body-worn camera footage not be released until those are adjudicated. We are committed to releasing those, but again, as I'll read in a letter here from the family of Mr. Black, part of why we won't be releasing it at this time. And so at this time, I will read the statement from the Gary Black family. And it says, this morning, many members of the family of Richard Gary Black met with Chief Nicholas Metz and other officials of the Aurora Police Department. The family reviewed a body-worn camera video recording and Mrs. Black's 911 audio recording. The family sincerely appreciated the opportunity to review these materials and recognized that there was no obligation for APD to share these materials at this time. At this time, the family has requested that the APD not release these materials to the public. The family desires space to grieve and does not wish to have the family and violent moments of Gary's distinguished life be his public legacy. The early morning of July 30th, 2018 was emotionally traumatic for all officers involved. The 911 telephone call by Mrs. Black was difficult to understand as large portions were unintelligible. The family acknowledges that APD's position that the responding officers did not receive a description of intruders. The family has learned that members of the APD have been receiving threats and subjected to other forms of harassment. This must stop. Mr. Black was a disabled U.S. Army veteran who deeply appreciated law enforcement. Mrs. Black has personally quilted dozens of blankets for the Aurora Police Department. Any disrespect to law enforcement carried out in Mr. Black's name would be contrary to his wishes. The investigation is in its early stages, and until it is complete, there will remain many more questions than answers. Any inquiries for the Black family should be directed to their attorneys, Qusar Muhammad Abi or Siddhartha Rathod at 303-578-4000. As we said before, we continue to provide any kind of family assistance we can to the Gary Black family. Our hearts go out to them, and we want to make sure that they're getting what they need. And then just to end on, and then we'll certainly open it up to any questions that you may have, and then certainly Mr. Brauchler or Mr. Redman can address some of those concerns that you may have. Our officers responded to an emergency call. They did what I expected them to do. They were confronted by a very, very violent and complex situation, and within 2 minutes, if that, had to make some very, very critical decisions that for the last 4 days we've been able to analyze and dissect over and over and over again. There was a reference that our officers acted recklessly. I dispute that strongly. They were not reckless. These officers responded, again, how I would expect them to respond in that kind of situation, given the limited amount of information that they were acting on, and the fact that they were responding to shots fired inside and immediately put themselves in harm's way to help save lives. With that, I will open it up to questions. I'm going to ask that since there are quite a few of you in here, that if you wouldn't mind raising your hands so we can kind of keep a little bit of order to this, I would really appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Did officers announce police? I don't know, I didn't hear you say that. Did they announce police as they were arriving?
We don't believe the word police was used, but they did announce several times, drop the gun, show us your hands. And again, this was within seconds of seeing the gun.
But he wasn't able to see the officers or hear police?
I don't know what he was able to hear. Unfortunately, one of the things that the family shared with us today was that Mr. Black had a significant hearing impairment that he received from his service in the military. So I don't know what he was able to hear or not hear. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any chance that there was any ringing in Mr. Black's ear after firing himself, that he may not have heard what the police officers were asking? And did he in return give any kind of indication that he had heard or understood what was happening?
What I can tell you, and that would really be speculation on my part to say whether he had it ringing in his ears or not. I believe it would certainly be possible. But unfortunately, the only person who could really answer that question would be Mr. Black. He was able to respond to officers as they got closer when they were asking questions about who else is in the house. And he was able to tell them that his grandson and son were in the bathroom, but that was as they were closer to him.
This was
After the shots were fired, when he was down.
So he was down, he was still able to talk.
Yes, ma'am.
The lawyer for the family said the wife gave a very detailed description of what he looked like and that there shouldn't have been a confusion of who was who in that house. Can you respond to that?
Yes, and I want to be incredibly respectful to my response because obviously the wife was going through an incredibly traumatic situation. In all of our reviews of the 911 tape, there was no description given. As I said before, when asked on the phone whether there were weapons, and she asked somebody else if there were weapons, and then she came back and said no. And then as I explained earlier, as our officer was going to the house and she was coming from the house, you can see her on the phone. So I don't know if she was talking to him or talking to whoever it was on the phone, because dispatch was still on the phone with her as officers arrived. But you could hear her say, and I'll say it again, quote, "He's got a gun," unquote. That was the extent of the information. I can't tell you right now if that officer heard that statement.
Can you elaborate as to why Mr. Harper picked that house? And the second part of that question is, did you perform any toxicology on him to figure out what, if anything, he may have been on?
No, I'm actually going to ask Sergeant Files just to address that part of it, and then maybe kind of talk real quick about the toxicology process and so forth for the coroners.
Sure. So, reference your question about the relationship between the two homes. All indications are that these people are unknown to one another, regardless of the fact that they lived across the street. Related to the question about toxicology, I can tell you that the process is time-consuming. Those lab results are sent to a lab to be analyzed. Those results come back. It's typically a 6 to 10 week turnaround, and that's dependent upon the load of work at the respective labs. And so oftentimes that's the last bit of information that we're waiting on before we can complete our summary for the district attorneys.
Thanks, sir. But did the people on the scene express to you why the intruder went across to that specific house? There's a number of homes in the area. You could have picked any which one. Correct.
And what we can tell you is there's no evidence that we've come across that explains that. Not from them. It appears to be completely random.
And just to piggyback on that, when you were asked about the toxicology, just to remind you earlier, I mentioned that one of the callers from the house across the street mentioned that he was on drugs. Didn't elaborate what kind. So,
was there any initial pushback against the police there? Some witnesses told us that people that were connected with the intruder thought at first that the police had shot Mr. Harper.
Well, we heard those same rumors. Again, keep in mind that as our officers are approaching the scene, they hear shots fired from inside. And then after they get back into the bathroom, the very first officer, the same officer who did fire his weapon at Mr. Black, finds Mr. Harper on the floor dead. At this point, according to our witness statements and so forth, Mr. Black is the one who shot and killed Mr. Harper in an attempt to save his family.
Chief, understandable accepting the family's request to not release the body camera video, but have you requested potentially just releasing the portion where your officers 5 times told Mr. Black to put his weapon down to potentially defend the officer's integrity in your department?
Actually, we have. I think part of this is going to be, again, because of our conversations with the family, that some parts of the videotape and the 911 tape are inaudible on the recordings. We feel it's important that before anything is released, that we analyze those through forensic services that specializes in those kinds of things. This might be a good time to ask Mr. Redman from 17th about the release of the body cam footage and their request of us on that. So.
Thank you. Afternoon. My name is Jess Redman. I'm the Assistant District Attorney for the 17th Judicial District, which includes Adams County. Briefly, before I answer that specific question, I too had the privilege to meet with the Black family and hear about Gary Black and his life with his family. And it's an incredibly tragic scenario. I'm here at the invitation of Chief Metz to explain the process and to explain our decision at the District Attorney's Office not to release facts of the investigation. I had the opportunity to meet with the Black family and discuss that process as well. My commitment is to victims of crime and to, in this scenario, the Black family as well as the Harper family. Lest we forget that that's another family that suffered the sudden and tragic loss of a loved one. I've not yet had the opportunity to meet with them. Understandably, it's a difficult time. The role of the District Attorney's Office is to gather an investigation and the facts and evidence collected by a multi-agency team as required by law to review a very narrow question, and that is whether a crime was committed by any involved officer or the other individual. The standard for that assessment is whether, based on the evidence, the district attorney can prove beyond a reasonable doubt at trial that a crime was committed. The question of why not release the body camera is answered simply in that this is an active criminal investigation. It's a mere few days following the incident. There are a number of individuals that have yet to be talked to. There are a number of individuals that we need to do some follow-up with. As the chief expressed, there's perhaps some inaudible portions of both 911 calls as well as body camera footage. We need to make every effort to identify those facts, and it's of the utmost importance while there's a public interest in knowing what happened and in seeing what happened. There's also a public interest in having faith and confidence that the system works properly and that decisions are made based upon fact that's not biased or in any way compromised by the sudden or too early release of information. So I was here very early Monday morning and throughout appreciate Chief Metz and his staff's willingness to invite me into the discussions as it relates to Chief Metz and the Aurora Police Department's commitment to the community and the transparency and the release of the factual information that led to this tragic event. Chief Metz has been gracious in my request to preserve the integrity of the investigation at these early stages, and what is paramount at this stage, having met with the Black family, is their request and is their dignity and is their privacy in the days going forward. So that's my decision. which is supported by the district attorney's office in preserving the nature of this investigation as we go forward. Please.
Mr. Redman, as we've learned over the past hour, some of the facts that came out early appear not to be correct. The Aurora Police Department has taken a pretty significant hit in the court of public opinion. Do you regret your office's decision to essentially muzzle the department in the past 3 days?
Again, my commitment in this process is to collect the investigation and make a determination based upon an unbiased or uncompromised investigation. I can't make any decision other than to ask that we not prematurely release information that might affect folks' memories or folks' recollection of what occurred or what happened. To compromise that would to erode the public's trust and faith in my role and in the district attorney's role in validly assessing whether a criminal charge should be filed in this case.
Was it the right decision to ask them to be quiet for 3 days?
In this instance, I believe it's the right decision until I have a full and complete investigation and the district attorney can make decisions based upon the facts as given them by the investigating agencies.
Mr. Redman, in a recent shooting that involved Zachary Parrish in Douglas County, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office released most of the body cam footage within a week of the shooting and continued doing the investigation, but the public and the press have been able to see everything that took place in that particular situation as also as tragic as it was, and lots of feelings and families on both sides were involved, and it was very difficult. Why? I mean, the precedent has been set, and it's not, it's been 6 months since that tragic situation happened.
Douglas County, as you know, is not within the 17th Judicial District. I have had no consultation with the Sheriff of Douglas County. I don't know anything about the facts of that case, nor am I involved in any way in the evaluation of that case.
Well, of course you're not, but you're standing next to Mr. George Brauchler, who was involved in that case, and Mr. Brauchler allowed for the release, if that even wasn't as a conversation of permission, but there's been an example where the body camera video was released prior to the full investigation being completed.
Whether there was an example, I suppose that might be a question for Mr. Brauchler. The example isn't a precedent for the 17th Judicial District. The law requires that I receive an investigation by a multi-agency team, which involves, in this case, Aurora Police Department, Denver Police Department, and to the extent necessary, the investigative unit of my office. I'm not going to speak to other jurisdictions or their decisions with respect to their investigations I was involved in.
Has Aurora Police, have y'all changed your body camera policy? Because in the past, I've just been flat out told no every time. And now it seems to be that you are willing to release it. So what exactly is your standard or is your policy?
The standard, as it's been, is that we would release videos after the adjudication of the case. So whether it's a criminal investigation or whether it's an administrative investigation, I'm not going to go into details, but all of you are aware of a high-profile disciplinary case that we handled a couple weeks ago where we did release that video. A lot of times what happens is we tell the media we can't release it at this time, and then they don't come back later to ask for it when things have been adjudicated.
Chief Metz.
What was the family's reaction when they saw the body cam video?
It was heartbreaking. I can tell you that when my folks sat around the table and first saw it, and I'm talking about police personnel who have been on the job 25, 30 years, who've seen just about everything, there wasn't a dry eye around the table. It is very horrific to watch, not just from the standpoint of watching a man who saved his family get shot, but also knowing what that little boy was subjected to.
How many officer-involved shootings have there been this year in Aurora?
5, sir.
And how disappointing is it to have yet another one by the same officer 30 days prior to the first shooting that he was involved in?
My only disappointment, honestly, is that that officer was put in that position.
Was he back on the job too soon?
No, I don't believe so. As I said earlier, that officer went through all the rigors that we require an officer to go through. We can't control the kinds of situations that our officers are going to be called to. Again, whether it's a week later or a year later, I feel bad for this officer that unfortunately lightning struck twice for him. But when I watch that video, I'm impressed at his ability to maintain calm. I'm impressed at his ability to move forward and go towards where a child was in danger. He did his job.
What's his future?
Well, he's going to be on administrative leave for a while, and then we'll figure that out. There was a question over here. I'm sorry, man. I'll get to you.
The June 27th shooting that occurred that this officer was involved in, is that still under investigation? What's the outcome of that investigation?
So, as I said earlier, yes, it is still under investigation. Both District Attorney Brauchler and Assistant District Attorney Redman from each of their respective district attorney's offices have ensured, because of the uniqueness of this situation, that they will conduct expedited reviews. I don't know, George, if you want to say anything more on that.
Just to follow up
Sure.
on that then, so from your standpoint in reviewing that particular shooting, did you feel, or your office feel, that he followed policy and did everything right in that particular shooting?
We haven't finalized the outcome of that, but from my review of the situation and my consultation with the 18th Judicial District, we didn't believe there was any problems with returning him back to the street. Over here, and then we go over here. Yes, ma'am.
I'm confused on how many officers were on the porch when the shots were fired.
I don't know, Ed, if you can answer that.
As it relates to the number of officers that were on the porch, that's a bit subjective. You have to remember they're not looking exactly where they're standing. There are a number of officers that were up near the front door at the time of the shots fired. We had approximately 4 uniformed officers, full police uniform, right by the front door, front porch at the time of this incident.
Well, in my mind, did you talk to the other officers and ask them why they didn't fire? Because the one that did is the one who just been through a similar incident. So my thought is maybe something happened there where, why is he the one that fired but the other ones didn't? Everybody else was able to hold back. Or was he the leader?
We've all walked through a door. We know how wide they are, and we know how much room they provide. The officers took the positions they took, and it was related more towards Mr. Black than them. They didn't, there wasn't some plan to go up in particular positions. They dealt with it, as the chief said, as it came. So
He was in the front of the line of officers.
he was not in the front, no.
Can you explain to us where he was so we have a better understanding?
Not at this time.
On the question about whether or not you heard cop or they identified themselves as police officers, obviously it's a chaotic situation. Anybody else here anybody else here, either this officer involved in the shooting or other officers, identify themselves as police?
Well, I can tell you that to date in our investigation, nobody else has been confused about who these individuals were. They all knew they were officers.
And I think to clarify that a little bit more, the officers were in full uniform. I can tell you from reviewing the body cam footage that their voices were very loud. So there obviously, I think most people could hear what was going on. In relation to your question about, why the other officers didn't shoot, I think it's really dangerous to assume that because other officers didn't shoot, that means that the officer who did shoot was in the wrong. You have to think about what their positions were, if they felt they had a shot, if they were worried that if somebody may be in front of them. All sorts of different things have to go into that, into making that split-second decision. So I think it's dangerous to assume because not everybody shot, and obviously if everyone had shot, we would be answering the question, why did everybody shoot? So from my view of the vantage point that this officer had of the situation, given from what I can tell, he had the best visual of and probably the safest position to take the action that he did.
Aren't they supposed to yell at police, though?
It's nice if they can. But also keep in mind, sir, we're talking seconds here. If I come up to you and all of a sudden you're surprised at something that just happened, I can't guarantee you're going to say everything that you've practiced in your head. So, you know, I'm certainly not going to fault the officer that he didn't get that word out.
So was he on the porch, was he in the doorway?
He was outside the threshold of the door.
Okay, and then to follow up on the records question, if you're not providing the 911 and the video and out of respect to the family, can you provide us a transcript of what had taken place to help us understand what happened?
I think that's going to be an issue that we'll have to discuss with the 17th.
Two more questions.
Are you worried about the safety of the officer involved?
He was first. She was first.
Regarding the officer, the investigation in the first arrest not being completed, other agencies will put an officer on desk duty until that happened. Why in this case was he put back in the field?
Most departments will do much like what we did, and that will be to evaluate them, give them time away off the streets. Unfortunately, sometimes these cases can take months to get an answer back, and we honestly can't afford to have an officer off the street that long.
Are you worried about the safety of the officer who fired that night? Is that why you're not releasing the officer's name at this time?
I always am worried about the safety of my officers, and at least for now, we will continue to maintain his name.
Chief, one last quick question. When you received the request from the district attorney to essentially muzzle your department, keep information for, as you mentioned, 80 hours, did you challenge that request?
Of course, we challenged it. But it shouldn't be interpreted as something where we just rolled over and said, okay. I mean, it was a great deal of discussion and debate that went back and forth. I think the 17th Judicial District was explained very well the need to withhold information. At the same time, I'm not shy about saying it, I've said it to Mr. Redman several times, it's been incredibly frustrating to not be able to provide information to our community the way that we are used to.
Can you talk about the lighting around the house at the time of the shooting?
The lighting was dark.
Were lights on in the house, on the porch?
Lights were on in the house.
Lights were on in the house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you all for coming.